guys, it's TheFrXion here, or Tank12, however you call me. I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks. Well, we are today reviewing the Type 58. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm now working pretty much full time, and it's not going to be very easy for me to produce videos, so the output is probably going to go down. I'm still gonna try to upload 3 videos a week, or 2 at least, but I cannot guarantee anything, unfortunately. That's just the way it is. I need the money, and yeah, still trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, but we'll get there eventually. Just will take us a little bit longer probably. So we're gonna be reviewing the Type 58, which is basically a copy of the T-34-85. The Chinese government got them exported or imported from the Soviet Union, and they produced them themselves. I think under license, and then they just called it the Type 58, and it's a very good tank. The T-34-85 was a very good tank, and the Type 58, on the other hand, is also a very good tank. So if you enjoyed the Type T-34 but you wanted to have more alpha damage, this is where this tank comes into play. And we're actually going to take a look at the stats, but we're going to compare it to the T-34-85 so you know what the differences are, because there are some, but they aren't massive. So right here you can see firepower wise we have to configure this tank accordingly, so we have the exact same loadout. It's going to be pretty close. Average damage is the same. The penetration is better on the T-34-85, but the rate of fire is actually worse. You also have 7 degrees of gun depression on it instead of the 5 degrees, which is a major downside to the Type 58. That is why a lot of people prefer T-34-85, but I still think you can make it work with the 5 degrees. It's just, it takes you longer to actually figure out how to use the tank more effectively. That is one of the things you have to learn when you're playing the Chinese medium tank line. You have to learn how to use positions that do not grant you a lot of gun depression, because these medium tanks don't have a lot of gun depression. 5 degrees is basically the best, 6 degrees is the best you can get. Aim time and dispersion, as you can see, is better than on the T-34-85, but that's also because I'm using equipment to decrease the dispersion. But the DPM is actually quite a bit better than the T-34-85. And I had a game where I was going up against the T-34-85, and yeah, it was a pretty close encounter. He managed to bounce 1 or 2 shots off of me, but in the end, I had the DPM advantage. Hit points wise, you have 30 HP more. Other than that, both tanks have the same armor layout. It's still the T-34 hull, but you have now this new and upgraded turret. 90 millimeters at the front, so it's gonna be better protected than prior on the Type T-34 by about 40 millimeters. You're actually going to be bouncing more shots now. It just has some very big weak spots with the 2 cupolas on top. The cheeks right here are actually quite flat from the front, and the entire turret ring down here is exposed, and it doesn't have a lot of armor. So moving on, we're going to take a look at the mobility of both the tanks, and you can see that you do have a little bit of an advantage on top speed because you have 55 kph on the Type 58. I'm running the turbo currently. Traverse speed is a bit better, but that's also because of the turbo and the field modifications I'm using, so it's pretty much the same. You do have better engine power on T-34-85, which also means that you have better specific power to weight ratio. So if you do put a turbo on this, it's going to be even faster. It's going to accelerate even faster, but it doesn't have the 60 kph top speed that the Type 58 has. Other than that, they're basically identical, and there are no big changes. The weight is also the same. Concealment and view range are actually a little bit of a difference though, because view range wise, this tank has 360 meters view range base, and the Type 58 base view range is at 370, so you get an additional 10 meters view range instead of the 360. But right here, this is a bit difficult because we have crew members that do have a little bit of training. 28.8% on the Type 58 while stationary, and 22.43 while on the move. That's because we're running a crew, and they are not at 100%, but they're getting there slowly. So you can see that's what it would be like if you are on 100%. Now this crew is very bare bones. The only thing you need is 6 cents, in my opinion, at tier 6 and tier 5 to still kind of have a role. If you have Brothers in Arms, if you're running premium consumables, if you're running gun rammer, you're going to have a better output, so you're going to be probably doing more damage. But other than that, you're still going to be competitive. It's not like you're gonna lose 50% of your DPM if your crew is not at 100%. And I didn't want to retrain everyone, and I'm just going to basically get a stock crew on this until I think it really becomes important to look at the crew situation, which is probably tier 7. Tier 7 is the place, tier 6, tier 7 is the place where I think it's going to be quite important to have the right crew setup. And like tier 6, you can still work with it, at least with Type 58. I didn't have any problems so far. But on the next tank, I think you probably should have a good crew setup, because when you get the +2 matchmaking, it's going to be quite annoying, and we're going to look into that a bit closer. But here on the Type 58, it should work out fine. So we're going to take a look at the field modifications real quick, because I haven't done all of them yet, because I wasn't able to play the game. I went with module durability increase, because you have pretty good turret rotation and track rotation. You don't have to work too much about it. Go with improved sight for a smaller aim circle. And then down here, because your mobility is already quite good, even in reverse, I would go for anti-reflective coating. This will grant you better concealment. That's always nice to have. That's all you have to know about the field modifications. And about the equipment, I basically just took it from Type T3485, and this equipment can not be put on the tier 7, so basically you have to buy new equipment afterwards. I went with the turbocharger to get the top speed. I went with improved aiming to really have the best kind of accuracy I can have on the tank. It goes down to 0.32, so it's going to be very reliable. And I went with coated optics to give me a little bit of a spotting advantage when I'm running around and about, but also because my crew is not 100% and I'm basically blind without any of the any of the skills. But this is how I play the Type 58. Now, if you want to play this as a complete DPM monster, you can obviously exchange the coated optics out and even the improved aiming device, get a gun rammer on it, and maybe even improve ventilations. You can do max damage, but you can also go down this way and be a bit more stealthy, and I think that's not a bad thing to be. So we're going to move on over to the gameplay, and then in the next video we're going to cover the T34-1, which I still have to buy, and as you can see, I'm pretty damn poor. But I'll have to get it either way to make a review. Tank that I really enjoyed, and then I finally have all of the Chinese tanks. So I see you guys in the gameplay. Okay, so the gameplay I have for you is in tier 6 matchup on the map Fjords, and somehow this map always gets picked by me, because the middle always works. When you go to the middle and you play that E5 area, you usually end up being able to do a lot of damage, and it's quite entertaining because it's a place where you need a little bit of gun depression, and Type 58 just has barely enough to make that spot work. But thankfully 5 degrees is not 3 degrees, because then it would really be awkward. I remember when I first played this tank, it was after I played the T3485. I realized that some things were different. I didn't know the exact things or the exact stats, but I remember that it felt different from the gameplay. And it turns out that, yeah, you have 5 degrees of gun depression instead of the 7 degrees you have in the T3485, which is really good for a Soviet tank. But put that aside, and you have more DPM on this vehicle, you have more HP a little bit, and better view range. So I think all of that combined kind of makes a case for this tank that it actually does have a little bit of an advantage in some areas, but also maybe a little bit of a downside in other areas, as I mentioned, with the gun depression that we are lacking and the T-34-85 actually does possess. But, you know, armor on this tank works great most of the time. The turret is actually quite sturdy, unless you start facing tanks that start shooting gold. 90mm of armor are not going to be enough to withstand APCR shells from a Cromwell Berlin or a Cromwell, and that is one of the things you have to be really careful about. But since this tank has some really good reverse speed of, I think, 20 kilometers per hour kph in reverse, if you have the turbo on it, it's 23. You can always like drive forwards and backwards to shoot someone and then drive back into cover. And you can see the DPM is really nice. If you have targets to shoot with this tank, you can basically just put round after round into them. And the accuracy is really important for me. That is why I went with the what was it called? The equipment piece that made your bloom smaller or increase your accuracy, because the DPM that you have in this tank is wasted if you're unable to hit your targets. But you can see we are working up here. We are doing a lot of damage. We are hitting everything and just trying to keep on firing the gun, because we need to start taking out vehicles that are currently kind of running around and knocking out our entire flank. I didn't pay too much attention to the north because I was busy here, but we lost our entire northern flank. So the AP shell on this vehicle doesn't have the best shell velocity. That's something I noticed, 792, but I think you can work with it most of the time. But you could see that leading shots was a bit difficult, even against the Chaffee right there. Weren't able to hit him, but one shot was like super close. But like the rate of fire is just insane when you think about it. And we basically tear apart this Type 58. So this is the basic premise of this tank. The armor is decent. It's going to work out pretty well. The DPM is great. The gun is great. If you have, you know, the ability to shoot tanks while you are sitting in a position like this, and you can basically hide the armor a bit away, you're going to be able to do a lot of damage. And that's what I noticed. This tank is actually also a quite decent sniper. So if you're on, let's say, Prokhorovka, which is somehow a map that has been in the rotation quite often in the recent couple of weeks, you can actually snipe from the tracks very easily up to the hill. I have several gameplays where I'm able to do that, and we might just take a look at like just a couple of minutes on how well the tank actually does at longer range fights. And that's just something that you might not expect of a medium tank at tier 6 to be this accurate. I never expected the Cromwell B to be accurate, and it really isn't. But this tank, with a little bit of help from equipment, actually is very accurate. So let's jump on over to that real quick, then we're going to have the final verdict, and we're going to move on to the next tank in the next video, which is the T-34-1. Okay, so we're just going to play the video from here. I'm not going to show you the entire gameplay because I think the game wasn't too long either way, but I just wanted to show off the capabilities of the Type 58 in a little sniper's nest. This place right here is very well known for being like one of the sniper spots to shoot the hill or anything that is on the other side of the tracks. And to be fair, I think the Type 58, it only lacks the shell velocity on the AP shell. Other than that, 128mm of penetration is not the best, but I think you can still make it work, especially at tier 6. You don't really have to worry too much. You didn't have to dip into the APCR shells at tier 6, but at tier 7 and even tier 8, I think the APCR shells are very much needed, especially against yeah, tank destroyers and some heavy tanks. You're gonna have quite a bit of a problem going through. But I still think that the AP shell works just fine in these tier 6 and some even some tier 7 encounters, where you mostly will be fighting against lightly armored vehicles. There are still lightly armored vehicles at tier 7, it's just sometimes they have just enough armor that your AP shell doesn't really do a lot of damage to them. The high explosive shells you have, they do 280 damage. They only have 43 millimeters of penetration, but I don't think anyone expected a lot on that. Nowadays, with the high explosive changes, they become even more obsolete. I think very difficult to use effectively at tier 6, because you don't really, at least I don't know the exact armor thickness of certain tanks, but you know, as soon as you're behind someone, you have a high explosive shell loaded, maybe the SU-85, sometimes the Type 64 definitely, maybe even the VK3002M might have a very thin armor on the engine neck or behind it. So these are all options, but generally speaking, I just think that this tank actually does quite well while sniping. Especially because the accuracy is very, very good, and also the DPM is very good, and you have decent gun handling. Aim time is low, and generally speaking, I think you're going to be doing just fine when you are sniping with this tank. So yeah, there's the French artillery. Unfortunately, we missed right there, but most of our shots actually do land, and we managed to put the finishing shot into the Type 64. Now, if you have played the Type T-34 prior, which you probably will have if you have gone to the Type 58, but it might be that you just kind of skipped on the line. The very funny thing is that the alpha becomes a lot higher. The prior alpha you had was something on the line of like 80, maybe 90 damage per shot, and that kind of doubles. So you get 160 alpha, and sometimes when you get very lucky, you can get rolls all the way up to 200 damage, and that's a very novel feeling, especially with that high DPM, to be able to put that amount of damage into enemy tanks. That is why I think the Type 58 is a very nice tier 6 medium tank. Depending on who you ask, you might want more DPM, or you might want more gun depression. And if the answer is you want more gun depression, I would kind of recommend the T-34-85. But if you are one of the players who says, you know what, screw the gun depression, I'm going to be able to work just fine with 5 degrees, that's just enough, I'm going to go for the extra DPM advantage I have with the Type 58. I think that's also fair. I really enjoy the Type 58. I've been playing it a lot, and I've played it a lot before I did this review. I just think that it's a good tank. There's nothing too special about it because we already know the type, the T-34-85. But I still think the line is certainly, even at tier 5 and 6, it's a lot of fun. That's all I wanted to say with these reviews actually. The tank is fun, the tank is competitive, the tank is in a good place. You don't have to be worried about it being obsolete. We're moving on to the tier 7, which did get a buff 2 years ago. I did make a video on it. And let's see if that one is worth your time now, or if it still isn't as good as it should be. But yeah, I've enjoyed this tank very much, and hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. See you guys on the next one. Until then, have a good one.